Good afternoon. It's excuse me. Good afternoon. It's Wednesday, the 9th of December, 2020, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. Your host today, Mike Robinson, myself, Brian Gerrish, and we're delighted to be joined by David Scott, bringing us Northern exposure from north of the border.
Well, obviously, we'll get started with Matt Hancock. Now, I'm not going to put the video up today because I'm not going to inflict that on anyone. I'm sure everyone has seen the video clip from Good Morning Britain of Matt Hancock crying his crocodile tears, except there were no tears at all. And Brian, I have to say that watching that sort of reminded me very much of many of the people have been talking about psychopaths in recent years and talking about the sort of characteristics of psychopaths and how they don't have any emotion of their own, but they attempt to sort of replicate or mirror emotions from normal people. And well, I'm just going to ask that question because there was nothing real in his reaction at all there.
Nothing real that I saw, Mike. We should encourage all of the UK column audience today to watch that clip and watch Matt Hancock, how he behaves, because there is this crass attempt at tearfulness, but then he's laughing. It's almost that he's laughing at his own inability to produce the desired media tears. I think people should watch it because I think we're getting a real insight into this man's mind, and I don't think it's a very nice place.
But what caused him to claim this reaction was the first male vaccine recipient, William Shakespeare, 81, from Warwickshire, who was to much fanfare given the jab yesterday. Well, everybody will be glad to know that the justification for this rollout has now been published. This is the front page from that document. It's available on the UK government website. Reg 174, that's Regulation 174, information for UK healthcare professionals. And the first thing that's very interesting about it is that it's a blank white page with that text on it. There's no branding, there's no acknowledgement of who has written this. And we'll be coming on to that topic again towards the end of this little segment, but let's just have a look and see what this document says. First of all, it says this medicinal product does not have a UK marketing authorisation, but has been given authorisation for temporary supply by the UK Department of Health and Social Care and the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency for active immunisation to prevent COVID-19 disease caused by SARS-CoV-2 virus in individuals aged 16 of age and over. So that's what they're claiming. It's claiming that it'll provide active immunisation for the disease, and they're claiming that it's been given temporary authorisation for use in everybody over the age of 16. Now, of course, on Monday's programme, we were listing the 8 or 9 categories of people that are going to get this. And really, nobody over the age, between the age of 16 and 64 is going to get it unless, or is going to be offered it unless they have what's described as an underlying health condition. So we'll see how many of those category take it up in any case. It goes on to say, as with any new medicine in the UK, this product will be closely monitored to allow quick identification of new safety information. Healthcare professionals are asked to report any suspected adverse reactions. See section 4.8 for how to do that. And of course, the MHRA has this brand new AI system in place, which cost them £1.5 million for recording these adverse reactions. Well, we'll see how effective that is as we go on, because clearly they're expecting them. It goes on to say this, this is a multi-dose vial and must be diluted before use. One vial contains 5 doses of 30 micrograms of the RNA embedded in lipid nanoparticles. Now, the issue of nanoparticles has certainly been doing the rounds in social media. We'll come on to that a little bit later as well. But just wanted to make the point that that term is in this document, and certainly this is part of this particular Pfizer vaccine. So they then go on to talk about vaccine handling, and it's certainly not easy to handle. Frozen vials should be transferred to 2 degrees to 8 degrees to thaw. A 195 vial pack may take 3 hours to thaw. Alternatively, frozen vials may be thawed for 30 minutes at temperatures up to 25 Celsius. For immediate use. Once thawed, the undiluted vaccine can be stored for up to 5 days at 2 to 8 degrees and up to 2 hours at temperatures up to 25 degrees. then you've got to sort of gently mix it a little bit. They say that if there are any large particles in this at all, then you've got to discard the vaccine in total.
Well, that's very reassuring, Mike. If there's any contaminants, don't use it.
Yeah.
Great.
They say that thawed vaccine must be diluted in its original vial with 1.8 milliliters of, well, it's a saline solution, but unpreserved sodium chloride solution for injection is the only diluent that should be used. This diluent is not provided in the vaccine carton. So there's opportunity for mistakes there, but you've got to make sure you use the right product to dilute the thing. And after dilution, the vial contains 5 doses, and you can then inject with a sterile needle and discard any unused vaccine within 6 hours. So once the vial is opened, 6 hours is what you've got to use it. Now, with respect to testing, this is what it says. Interaction with other medicinal products and other forms of interaction. No interaction studies have been performed. Good. Let's move on. Under the category of fertility, pregnancy, and lactation, it says, for women of childbearing age, pregnancy should be excluded before vaccination. In addition, women of childbearing age should be advised to avoid pregnancy for at least 2 months after their second dose. You were going to say something?
Well, I think this is extremely key. This brings us onto the subject of what this vaccine can do.
Indeed, but it then goes on to say it is unknown whether COVID-19 mRNA vaccine has an impact on fertility. So they don't know. Doesn't matter. Don't get pregnant within 2 months of taking the second dose. But there's no real concern, it seems, about any long term. They're just happy to not know. So anyway, the safety profile, what do they say here? The safety of COVID-19 mRNA vaccine was evaluated in participants 16 years of age and older in 2 clinical studies conducted in the United States, Europe, Turkey, South Africa, and South America. Now, earlier before the program, Brian, I asked you just to guesstimate, really, how many people would you be comfortable with testing this before it was rolled out? And the number you came up with was 100,000.
Well, that's
based on a UK population.
That was just my guesstimate of where they might start with the number of people that would form an effective trial basis.
Okay, so let's look and see what effective trial basis they have run. First of all, study 1 enrolled 60 participants, 18 through 55 years of age. This is their text, and you'll explain why I'm saying that in a second. And then study 2 enrolled 44,000 participants, 12 years of age or older. But, and there's a pretty significant but here, out of these, at the time of analysis, 19,067 were evaluated for safety 2 months after the second dose. So at this point in time, this vaccine has been approved based on a testing cohort of 19,067, but only 9,531 of those were actually given the vaccine, because 9,536 of them were given a placebo. So, David, maybe at this point I could welcome you to the program and say, Brian's initial guesstimate was 100,000. I'd be interested to know what you think would be a reasonable number to be testing before you roll this thing out. But nonetheless, we're actually rolling it out on the basis of safety evaluation of 9,531 people.
It seems a very small number, and also not very much on the age profile other than older than 12. We're rolling this out initially to the very elderly and the very infirm. That's where the greatest risk is. It would be interesting to know, and it doesn't seem to be included in that document, how many people in that category we have actually tried this on.
I didn't see, I may have missed it, but I didn't see any specific number for that at all. But looking at some of the mainstream press coverage of this, that number is guesstimated to be very, very low. But my next question then is, who wrote this document? Because look, I've already shown this text, but look how immunisation is spelt. Who in Britain says 18 through 55 years of age? Now, I'm really questioning who wrote this document. Was it the Department of Health and Social Care? Was it the MHRA? or was it actually Pfizer themselves? Is this a copy and paste job? Is this why there's no actual logo on the document? There's no attribution on the document at all. It's completely blank and devoid of any names of either government agencies, individuals in government, individuals at Pfizer, or Pfizer themselves. So I'd like to know who wrote this document. It looks very much like it's using, and there are other examples. It's not just the word immunization spelt with a Z. There are other words spelt with the Americanized spelling instead. So who wrote this? But look, I think one of our viewers has this just about right. The clinical trial goes on until the end of December 2022, and the UK government basically have enrolled us onto a clinical trial. And Brian, I was saying to you earlier, it's pretty clear to me that that's what's happened, but the fact that they've chosen people over the age of 80 as the first group for this. On Monday's programme, we were highlighting once again that, of course, relatives of the elderly cannot get into care homes just to see the condition that their relatives are in, the elderly are in. So you've effectively got lab rats in an enclosed, locked up environment. And it's going to be very, very hard for people to track what's happening to those people inside the care homes while this clinical trial is going on.
Well, they're going to die, Mike. I'm going to say it in a talk I gave many, many years ago. Somebody asked me about what these people wanted. They were talking about the malevolence within government, and I said they want to kill us. And that is exactly what has been done to date with the lockup for COVID, and that is going to continue, except now we've got a whole captive section of the population, which is those elderly people, and you as a relative are not going to be able to protect them.
And I just want to show this as well from another UK column viewer, so thanks very much for these two. And David, it's quite incredible, isn't it? Because this says, "Hi Mike, hope you're well. I've received a letter addressed to my eldest today, who is 17 years old. The letter's from the NHS inviting him to participate in blood tests and surveys over the coming months to do with examining antibodies around infectious diseases. Apparently, basically to me, it seems like lab work they should have done prior to rolling out some dodgy vaccine, and they're looking for 0 to 24-year-olds. I was more concerned how they're bypassing us as parents while they're still technically a minor. And of course, one of my youngest child, who's 15 now, just 15, has received COVID test, an invitation to take part in COVID test surveys. The levels of surveillance, David, are just unprecedented.
Surveillance is huge. The timing of the trials is tardy, and the information is lacking. You said that the instructions on using the vaccine was to discard it if there was large particles. I wonder how large is. It seems an odd sort of specification. There is much information missing. For example, what was the placebo in these trials? And there's much to know. We would hope that the mainstream media would be doggedly pursuing this information.
Yes.
Well, we're going to be talking about the BBC a little bit later in the news, and I'm afraid to say, David, they certainly won't be, because they've got a completely different agenda, which we'll be looking at.
My understanding is that the placebo was a saline solution, and that was it. Now, it isn't going very well already, because this is the headline in the Mail just before we came on air. Warning over UK vaccine rollout as 2 NHS staff given jabs suffer anaphylactic reaction. Regulators urge people with history of significant allergies not to have Pfizer injection just 24 hours after Britain's mass inoculation kicked off. Now, just purely anecdotally, I can say that quite a number of people in the medical profession who were speaking to my parents yesterday have been, several of them have been saying that they are extremely skeptical about this vaccine. They've no intention of taking it. They're very concerned that they may be forced to take it as a condition of their continued employment. But here we've got 2 NHS staff reacting pretty badly to it. Both people are recovering following the first day of the mass vaccination programme, says the Daily Mail. but NHS in England said that all trusts involved with the vaccination programme have been informed, so that's okay then. And the MHRA has given advice to anyone who has a history of significant allergic reactions not to get the vaccine. But of course, not everybody knows what their propensity to a significant allergic reaction might be under any particular set of circumstances.
Well, that's absolutely it, Mike. Anaphylactic shock kills people, has killed people, does kill people. This is not being mentioned at all. We'll see a bit more of this when we come on to the BBC. But effectively, potentially deadly reaction, just not discussed. Oh, you might get a bit of swelling, you might get a bit of fever, but the real dangers are not being discussed. So we can now see the media manipulating the news. It's pushing the pro for the vaccine, and it's suppressing all the negatives for the vaccine. It's quite clear this is happening, and we'll show some of the baseline documents which show where this policy has come from.
Now, the news from the United States isn't so good either, or is it? I mean, it's really, this is really one of the basic questions here. So this headline from New Delhi, FDA publishes first peer-reviewed report on Pfizer trial as Britain rolls out COVID vaccine. And what the FDA is saying is that 6 people died during the Pfizer trials. They're saying that 4 of those people were on the placebo side of the fence. 2 of them were while they were taking the actual vaccine. It's not clear whether the vaccine contributed to those 2 deaths. But the question then is, or at least we're expected to simply trust the word of the manufacturer that the 4 that they say were from the placebo side were on the placebo side. Now, I don't have any evidence whatsoever to suggest that they weren't. But my concern here is, David, that all the way through this emergency approval in the UK, it's all based on Pfizer's data, Pfizer's statements, Pfizer's claims, and there's no independent verification of any of this.
Yes. Just to go back to the vaccine reactions you were describing there, Mike, Scotsman was reporting this. Both staff members, they report, are understood to have had a history of allergic reactions to the extent that they carried adrenaline auto-injectors with them. I find that astonishing that they were given that vaccine under those circumstances, and astonishing that the NHS needed to be then told not to do that. That seems to be so obvious as to defy belief. Yes, and as in terms of the overview, well, we know what the vaccine companies have covered up before. We know from the film Vaxxed that they covered up the link with autism. They manipulated the data. They sat in a meeting, executives from drug companies sat in a meeting, heard about the risk. One left the meeting to phone his son to tell his son not to vaccinate his grandchild, and then went back into the meeting to manipulate the data. And by the time the data manipulation was finished, processing was finished, there was nothing to see. So we know what they're capable of. So oversight, well, yeah, we need to see the data, and we need to see independent analysis of this by people who are capable of critical thinking and who are not in the pay of the drug companies who have a financial interest in not finding anything.
Yeah. Unfortunately, that's going to lead, I'm saying that as black humour, that's going to leave MHRA out of the equation, isn't it? Because it's already been shown, what they've been feeding off.
Right. Now, I'm going to just preface this little section that there may be people disagree with me on this. There may be people not too far away from where I'm actually sitting that may disagree with me on this particular point. But I'm just going to throw this out here for a little bit of discussion. So this is from Nature Nanotechnology, and it's talking about nanomedicine and the COVID-19 vaccines. And they're talking about 2 nanoparticle-based vaccines close to obtaining approval from the US Food and Drug Administration. Of course, the Pfizer one already has. Now, here's one of the companies that produces this type of things. In the Pfizer vaccine, we've got this lipid nanoparticle. And I just wanted to sort of explain a little bit what this means. So if we look at some of the terms, first of all, a lipid is a substance that's insoluble in water and soluble in alcohol, ether, and chloroform. They're an important component of living cells. Together with carbohydrates and proteins, lipids are the main constituents of plant and animal cells. Cholesterol and are examples of lipids. And then as far as the definition of a nanoparticle, well, it's an ultrafine particle, usually between 1 and 100 nanometers, but could be up to 500 nanometers. So that's what a nanoparticle is. But now I've seen a lot of stuff on social media over the last few days about focusing on this particular issue of these lipid nanoparticles. And really, what are we talking about here? Well, it's a little nanoparticle, a sphere, which holds the RNA inside it as it's being injected into the person, and then is helping to get that RNA inside the cells. But my point here is, or my question is, whether people should be focusing on this term and really demonizing this term or not, because of course nanoparticles are nothing new. They're not even new to the alternative medicine arena, because colloidal silver is an example of nanoparticles suspended in water, and people have been using that for a very long time. So the demonizing the term isn't necessarily the correct thing to do, particularly because there are some quite positive applications for this technology, and this is one from pain medicine, talking about a promising new paradigm for the control of pain. And there are so many people that are really struggling with the current pain drugs that are available, even though there's nothing else really available aside from allopathic remedies for pain. So it would be good to see these types of things developed in the not too distant future. My point here really, David, is that when we're targeting or choosing the target to go for, in this case we should be targeting the payload rather than perhaps the method of delivery, because although the method of delivery is novel, it actually potentially has some pretty positive impacts for the future. It's the payload we should be aiming for here, and well, that's my point really.
Yes, and it's a good point. The essential thing is the study, is the assessment honest? Is it are real problems being examined thoroughly? It's not a case where we should be averse to new technology because it's new, on the basis that it's a plot because it's new. New technology and old technology can be used for good or ill. It's the quality of the human assessment, the human management, and the human direction that we need to be looking at most carefully. Is that straight and honest and willing to admit mistakes, or is that hidden and secret and shielded from examination?
Any thoughts?
Well, I wouldn't disagree with that, David. I am slightly nervous on this subject because we have a huge problem convincing many people in the general public of UK that we have people in government who are not just making mistakes. It's not cock up. What we've actually got is a malicious conspiracy which is setting out to hurt and damage people. And quite clearly that mentality exists within the scientific community, that we have people, you've mentioned the term psychopath, Mike, we've got people that are clearly psychopaths or on the verge of it, who are driving new technology, and they seem to have the upper hand. And sometimes it can be very difficult to convince people we need to really be alert for people whose intention is malicious. By acknowledging that part of what's happening here could be used for benefit is of course true, but it just makes me a little bit nervous that we've got enough trouble focusing on the dangers of what's actually happening. And the moment you try and say, well, actually this bit's bad, but this bit's okay, we're diluting our message a bit. But maybe I'm a bit sensitive to that issue.
Well, look, we are heading apparently for a third wave potentially, and apparently the lockdown is being lifted a bit too much, and really we don't want to be having a good Christmas at all this year. We need to not go away for a week. We need to not visit our friends and family, and this is according to Susan Mikey, I'm not quite sure how to pronounce her name.
Mitchie, I would have thought.
But
we're in trouble over names, Mike, yes. So we're probably getting a bit of feedback.
But she's from SPI-B on the SAGE group. This is the Behavioural Insights group. So let's have a listen to what she was saying on the BBC this morning.
when we talk about people, we know there are very, very different groups, and the people that have, or the groups that have always been most challenged in terms of adhering to the restrictions have been younger people and especially younger men. So yes, I think that there would have been people who would have, no matter what, kind of done what they usually do. But I think that would have been a tiny minority. And whilst I think sometimes people push the boundaries, if the leadership and the message is coming from many different, and especially if it's coming from trusted sources, that we need to really, really be careful this Christmas. And, as much as possible, see people outside or use the online platforms, think of creative different ways, drinks with neighbours on the street, more kind of local community rather than traveling miles across the country. Then I think that people would have really, and I still think it's not too late, because transmission rates are going up. We are facing the potential of a really bad third wave come January and February, unless we really take steps now to prevent that. So I think a bit of a reorientation, a bit of a reset on how people are thinking about Christmas would be really good.
So if you've stopped laughing, David, I'm just interested to know your thoughts on that, because first of all, she's pulling out all the talking points from this side of the argument over the last few days. Trusted sources, we've got to rely on the trusted sources. What defines a trusted source? It's undefined. She's claiming the transmissions are up when, in fact, most of the mainstream press is arguing the transmissions are down. Are these people just lying for an outcome?
Yes.
Yes, that's exactly right. Yes, up is down, down is up. The third wave is coming, although there's never been a third wave in any viral epidemic before. But yeah, the reset, we must reset Christmas. Okay, I'm finding that very interesting, because there is a religious aspect to this. You must obey the state, and the state will set you free, and they will provide you with redemption and will save you from certain death. There is a religious aspect, and it's fascinating to see the focusing in on Christmas and what people do. I wonder where that one's going to go.
Well, shall I say where it's going to go? I'm happy to say where it's going to go, David. They want to completely eradicate Christmas and everything about Christmas. That's where they're going as fast as possible. Because if they can get rid of Christmas, they're well on their way to getting rid of Christianity, and Christianity is the key target for these people.
Right, David, let's move on to the World Health Organization and, well, some best practice guidance. Are you following this guidance?
Well, you know it's going to get really dark and nasty when they start to use the term best practice in any sort of governmental context. How to respond to vocal vaccine deniers in public. This is a guide to how to argue with those nasty anti-vaxxers. The fact that the World Health Organization has decided to produce this is, of course, evidence that they are struggling. They're struggling to get their message across, and they're struggling because they're losing the argument. So, first of all, an abstract. This guidance document provides basic broad principles for a spokesperson of any health authority on how to respond to vocal vaccine deniers. The suggestions are based on psychological research on persuasion, on research in public health, communication studies, and on World Health Organization risk communication guidelines. Risk communication guidelines, more on that later. It's a fascinating document. This is full of little gems. This is them explaining to their people how to program the public, and also at the same time it's programming their spokesman so that they are filled with appropriate fear. More on that in just a minute. So there are rules. There have to be rules. The general public is your target audience, not the vocal vaccine denier. So you don't talk to people who have problems and concerns. No, you're talking past them at the general public. aim to correct the content and unmask the techniques that the vocal vaccine denier is using. And the goal is to make the public audience more resilient against the anti-vaccine statements and stories, support the vaccine hesitants in their vaccine acceptance decisions. So it's all about reframing how the public think. That's the goal. And on we go here. Table 1 is actions undertaken to spread the message of vaccine denialism. So this alone is a fascinating little table. First, skewing the science. Vocal vaccine deniers ignore and reject scientific evidence that counters their arguments. Now, this is Boingflip. This is the World Health Organization accusing vaccine skeptics of the thing that they themselves are guilty of, because we all know the World Health Organization are ignoring the concerns raised by many people of good conscience who are raising the alarm about what's happening to children and others who receive vaccines. They go on, they only consider results that seem to confirm their belief. It's the World Health Organization again. The results either do not represent the scientific consensus, are poorly conducted, or misrepresented by the denier. The scientific consensus is, of course, meaningless because science doesn't work by consensus. That's a logical fallacy.
Yeah, David,
just
let me mention that if anybody wants to see an article on that, there's a fantastic blog post by, or opinion piece by Ian Davis on the UK Column website on the front page at the moment on that particular topic, and it's well worth reading. Sorry, I just wanted to mention that. Go on ahead.
Yes, so we talk about censorship. Censorship. Vocal vaccine deniers shut down critics and avoid open discussions. Who is shutting down the critics? The state is shutting down the critics of the vaccine policy. The social media companies are shutting down the critics. The World Health Organization are shutting down the critics. This is obviously reversal. This is accusing your opponents of the thing that you are guilty of. It's called gaslighting. It's a very strange thing. And then they say attacking the opposition. Vocal vaccine deniers use personal insults. Oh, the horror, right? What has Andrew Wakefield had to endure in terms of personal insults? This is just a bizarre position for the World Health Organization to take, right? It gets worse. They then talk about what sort of people are these vaccine deniers. The individuals who refuse vaccines are very heterogeneous. They cannot be accurately described in simple terms, such as the anti-vaccine movement. They're very diverse, often have very personal reasons for not vaccinating, such as their children having been harmed and them having witnessed it. The variable degrees of conviction regarding the mindset. A group of vocal vaccine deniers includes conspiracy theorists, some of whom are very highly educated individuals who are well aware of the available scientific literature. Is that not a very strange statement? These conspiracy theorists are very highly educated and are aware of the literature. Very bizarre. So it goes on. I would point out at this point, that made me think of Vernon Coleman. If you haven't read his book, it's well worth a read. Now, public media, they say, are an opportunity, not a threat. So the World Health Organization recognized that the mainstream media are tame. They're only going to repeat the approved message. Right? It's an opportunity, not a threat. And they say again, remember you're representing the scientific consensus. So it's all about this. This is all the argument that comes in this. They don't address any of the actual issues. We're the scientific consensus. That's a meaningless statement that illustrates the people writing it don't know anything about science. And it's a logical fallacy, and it's repeated over and over in this document. So we then have a list, do's and don'ts, things to do. They are quite fascinating. Prepare 3 key messages you really want the public to know and remember. So this is what the politicians do. So we're operating on the political level here. We're talking about changing minds. We're not talking about arguing science. We're talking about arguing politically. Keep the 3 messages as simple as possible because the people are stupid. And you've got to dumb it down for the people. Repeat your key messages as often as reasonably possible. So this is advertising meets politics. This has nothing to do with vaccine safety or anything else. It's to do with changing minds. Stick to your facts and repeat your key messages instead of repeating any anti-vaccine argument. Now, this is critical. That's saying if you're going to argue against someone on the facts, the first thing you would do is you would state their case fairly, and then you would show where it was flawed. This is instructing the spokesman not to do that. You cannot mention the vaccine deniers, so-called deniers case. You cannot mention it. It must be left unsaid. It must be excluded from what you say. This tells me that they know they have no answer. Emphasize a high level of safety rather than the probability of adverse reactions. Okay, that's admitting there are adverse reactions, and we're just talking, that's spin. We're talking about how we describe it. Use inclusive terms to underline a shared identity with the audience. So this is political speech manipulation again. Avoid raising questions about the personal motive of the vaccine. I love this one. Avoid raising questions about the personal motivation of vocal vaccine deniers. I wonder why the World Health Organization and the pro-vaccine lobby, with all of their commercial links to Big Pharma, would not want to talk about personal motivation. Can you imagine? I can't imagine. Be honest during any discussion. Now, amen to that. But of course, they have to be honest without mentioning the other side's argument. So that's quite deceptive as well. Communicate what has been achieved so far and what needs to be done. That's just calling for a utopian. This is where we're going to go to the sunny uplands. Avoid humorous contributions during the discussion, because the authoritarian leftist world government doesn't do humour. If you want any proof of that, watch the BBC. Underline scientific consensus with regard to vaccine and safety and efficacy. So all they have is consensus. They don't have the data, they have the consensus. Emphasize the social benefits. So they go on, they look at the 5 characteristics of denialism, conspiracies, fake experts, pseudo activity. I thought 4 was particularly interesting. Impossible expectations. Expecting 100% certain results or health treatments with no possible side effects. So expecting a vaccine to be totally safe is an unrealistic expectation. That's the view. So they're saying you've got to correct the content. They emphasize the threat of the disease, that there are no alternatives. They talk about effectiveness. The scientific evidence is clear. Vaccination is the most effective health intervention for prevention of many serious diseases. It's those words. That's in quote marks. They're actually telling their spokesman what to say, those words. They're not saying, go to this paper and you'll see the evidence in the paper and then you go and speak. They're giving them the lines. Same with safety. The scientific evidence is clear. Vaccination is a safe way to prevent diseases. We'll come on to what safe means later in the show. Right, and the final one, right at the end of the document, is fascinating. So this is to the spokesman. This is to the health spokesman. And what they're telling them is you are at personal risk because the anti-vaxxers are so unhinged that they may attack you personally. Right? How to protect yourself. Be aware that your evidence and opinion may put your personal safety in jeopardy. This is lying to people to frighten them, to control how they think. A really fascinating thing. And it talks about making sure you have a safe means of escape. So if you're going to speak to someone who's got some problems with the vaccine policy, who thinks that vaccine harm is significant and that vaccine policy needs to be revised, you have to look about how you're going to escape the building if it all kicks off and it turns violent and you're at personal risk. And it tells them not to go alone. You're always going to take a friend because you could be at personal risk. This is delusional, and it's put out there to frighten people and control how the spokesman thinks. A fascinating little document. What do you think, gentlemen?
Well, if I may, I wanted to come straight back and say it's vicious. This is malicious and vicious use of applied psychology. And yes, it is absolutely designed to frighten that official spokesman or woman. But also, we've been talking about how the police are now behaving in this particularly brutal way. Exactly the same techniques are being used on the streets. They're being told that now the public are so aggressive that if they have got to go and attend some small little protest group in the depths of Cornwall, those policemen on the streets have got to be looking over their shoulder that somebody's going to come and kill them. And that is why the police are behaving in this very, very aggressive, brutal way. So my key point here is that the applied psychology, which we're going to go on into now to see where some of this stuff is coming from, is being used in a very cruel and malicious way. And the public has got to be made aware of what that psychology is, how it's being used, which you've done extremely well in the segment you've just covered. We've also got to identify the named people in government who are responsible for pushing this psychology into our society. We need those people brought into a court to face very serious charges, because they are damaging. It's not just damaging the interaction of people, they're damaging people's mental health. They're damaging the mental health of the police. They're damaging the mental health of people who are inside the NHS, who are now being caught up in all of this COVID vaccine propaganda. This is an attack on people's minds.
Yes. Okay. Well, look, if you like what the UK Column does and you would like to support us, then please head over to ukcolumn.org/community, and there are options to help us out there. And David, I believe Smantha Baldwin has a book out now.
Yes, Smantha Baldwin, the very brave and gallant mother of 2 children, has written a book called Everything is Going to Be Okay. It's subtitled, Her First Mistake Was Trusting Him, Her Second Was Trusting the State. It's gone on sale this week. I'm partway through it. I'll do a book review next week on this. And also I would suggest that people go to the Smantha Baldwin interview series, 5-interview series, covers the story as well on Northern Exposure. The book's excellent, very readable, and although the content is shocking, it's written in a very accessible style, and I would encourage people to seek this out. Amazon and other sources for this book, I'm sure, will be available, and support Smantha and read her story.
Okay, thank you for that.
Yeah, important book. Well, we did anticipate that, having criticised Nigel Farage in the last news programme, there would be some feedback. We had, I think, 4 emails that came in. We decided to comment on the response. We've also decided we're going to put the main text of one of those emails up on screen. But very, very interesting as to how people responded when we showed a film clip of an elderly lady who was clearly very sick, being held within a care home, her daughter prevented from actually having physical contact with her mother, and then the staff taking that lady away, and the grieving daughter left outside of the glass, unable to get to her mother, that elderly lady now in the brutal control of the British state to be euthanized or vaccinated as the government requires. We contrasted that situation with the fact that Nigel Farage was putting up documentaries talking about the damage to the pub trade. We were commenting on effectively the brutalisation against elderly people versus Mr. Farage talking about the pub trade. That is what we showed. Well, the feedback that came in was that we'd been particularly nasty to Mr. Farage. So I'll just read this one out. I was introduced to UK Column today for the first time and was impressed at first with the candid nature of the broadcast. That was until you cut off the Nigel Farage piece, where he was in fact exposing fascist-style tactics on the part of council workers who had stitched up a pub worker and then fined him for giving them a beer. Absolute entrapment. Instead, you gave very cheap shots about Farage only caring where his next point is coming from. This makes you no better than the BBC, who cut and edited the Trump piece on swallowing bleach and is a shocking and shoddy example of journalism. I would like to see an apology issued on a subsequent episode, or I myself will spread the word of this shoddiness. Now, what is interesting about the emails that came in is that none of them mentioned anything to do with the deaths of elderly people. This was simply ignored, and everybody, or of those emails that came in, everybody focused on how terrible it was that we had criticised Nigel Farage for focusing on the pubs instead of the deaths of the elderly people. So I'm happy to discuss with anybody why we have consistently warned against what Mr. Farage does. But in this case, we are again warning that he's drawing people's minds into what is effectively an important issue. Yes, if you're in the pub trade and you're being entrapped and you're losing your job or your business, that is very important. But our start was to say, why isn't this man talking about the deaths of tens of thousands of elderly people? And the responses that came in those emails also ignored the critical issue of the deaths of elderly people. David, I'm very happy to go, obviously not for this news, but I've responded to the individuals with what my concerns about Nigel Farage are, what he has done, how he has abandoned so many people. But we've got a callousness coming in where people can't see the wood for the trees, in my opinion. This is people who cannot see the key issues. It's down to image and reputation and are you being unkind to my party? This is very, well, what is the expression? I don't know. This is something very serious that's happening to people's ability to think for themselves.
This operating within sort of party rules and party loyalties and not thinking outside of it is very dangerous. It's important that wherever our loyalties lie, or even wherever we see there's an injustice, we don't lose sight of the bigger picture. One of the problems the columns had with Nigel Farage in the past is we were running a major campaign on European military union, providing huge amounts of information and data as he was campaigning on the subject of Brexit. This is back in the UKIP days. They wouldn't touch it. They consistently refused to touch it until much, much later. So they will get to the party, but it's later. These things, if they're happening now, need to be talked about now. There are many injustices floating around with COVID. The one that Nigel Farage was highlighting with the entrapment of the worker in the pub was disgusting. It was nasty. It was totalitarian. And he absolutely should be talking about that. But there is much more he should be talking about. I think that was your point, that it's about priorities and it's about making sure we cover the big issues, not just the small ones or not just the more minor ones. There's an element of COVID which is about getting people to spy on one another. It's profoundly totalitarian and it's very important. And it's also about getting government officials to do wicked things for the state. And that's, even if they're small, they're still wicked. That's also very important. And we need to talk about these things, although they might seem more minor. But we also need to talk about the big issues of what's happening to national defence, what's happening in the NHS, what's happening in the care homes, and how people are actually being treated. And the fact that we're seeing the elderly killed intentionally, their lives shortened, as a policy. And we know about it, and it's been going on for decades, and it's getting worse. And there is a risk that under the COVID restrictions, it will get much worse, because look in that video that you showed, look how difficult it was, how impossible it was for a woman who clearly loved her mother and was clearly only there out of concern over her mother's welfare. Look how she was treated, and she couldn't get in contact. She was completely excluded. Under those circumstances, it is more, not less likely that these crimes against the elderly will continue.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that, David. I will say to the audience, I have answered in an email the criticisms levelled at us, but I've also in those emails mentioned issues such as Nigel Farage running away from our correspondent David Ellis when he tried to talk to him about EU Defence Union. But I'm sure we're going to have more debate on this. Let's get back on how the media is controlled, and we're back on the World Health Organization and behavioural considerations. So a big thank you to viewer John, who sent this through to us early this morning. You can download this document, Behavioural Considerations, Acceptance and Uptake of COVID-19 Vaccines, 2.9 megabytes of World Health Organization document. And what is it really about? Well, it's using applied political psychology to enforce policy. This is the acknowledgements, so you can see exactly the people involved. One name jumped out at me immediately. Let's see, highlight this first section. This document was developed by members of the WHO Technical Advisory Group, TAG, on Behavioural Insights and Sciences for Health, chaired by Professor Cass Sunstein. Now, the moment I saw that, I knew what we were looking at here, because in a recent talk that I did for Ian Crane's Alternative View 11.1, I put up this table on screen, which was showing the chronology of the use of political applied psychology within the British government. And the year here on the left of your screen is 2009. And it says that basically this is coming in. It gave some particular documents that we're talking about: personal responsibility, animal spirits, that was an interesting one, the decisive moment. You're seeing policy publications, you're seeing in the third column NGOs and think tanks, but what did this particular document warn about? Well, it was saying all these meetings were going on. So here's Richard Thaler meeting with David Cameron, and then it made a point of saying that Cass Sunstein had been appointed head of the Office of Regulatory Affairs USA. Well, that's a very interesting post to be in. But if you go back, if you go down through that column, you'll see all the other people who are being linked into the use of political applied behavioural psychology to get a message across. So Michael Bickard, Sir Liam Donaldson, Gus O'Donnell, Greg Beals, and on it goes. I also highlighted this book, and I'm going to encourage every member of the UK column audience to buy this book, because it is very, very detailed information on how much of this applied behavioural psychology policy has now got into the government and the UK civil service. And I will say the infection is everywhere, but this is a particularly good book with a lot of detail. The only thing that these university psychologists don't seem to realise is that this is such a bad thing in the hands of malicious people. They seem to regard anybody using the psychology as, being on the side of the public, which is clearly not true. So let's get back onto the World Health Organization document. This is contents, background, introduction, drivers of vaccine uptake, an enabling environment, social influences, motivation, and then they give conclusions and references. Well, let's have a look at a little bit of it. It says, while the behavioral goal is uptake of COVID-19 vaccine by the general population, achieving that goal will depend on the behaviour of other actors in the system, those offering the vaccination, those planning how and where to offer the vaccination, and those tasked with maximising uptake using strategies such as persuasion and the use of trusted endorsers or validators. Thank you. I had big problems with that.
Yeah, this is what Susan Mickey was talking about earlier.
Yes. So we've got another World Health Organization document, but I'm very confident that we will find links. We really are seeing those links back into American psychologists and UK government psychologists to make this happen. So it says behavioural research identifies 3 categories of drivers of vaccine uptake, in addition to people having the necessary knowledge. That's an enabling environment, social influences, and motivation. The drivers interact and overlap for the purpose of understanding the problem and identifying strategies. It's helpful to keep them separate. So this is detailed analysis, multiple groups influence uptake of vaccination, including political decision makers, immunization program managers, community and religious leaders, health workers, civil society organization, media outlets and digital platforms. David, before I go on, it's so clear that we've actually got this focus on controlling the mainstream media in order to push the government line. There must be no other opinion.
Yes, and if you look at the definition of consent we showed in the column last week, which requires the individual to weigh up using reason the positive and negative effects and form a balanced and independent view, under such circumstances, consent ceases to have any real meaning.
Indeed. Well, we'll follow it through. This is on social influences. Sometimes barriers to vaccination acceptance and uptake are the product of unfavourable social influences and insufficiently favourable ones. Such influences can include beliefs about what others in one social group do or what they approve and disapprove of. So this is very much, we are the lab rats. They're watching how we behave as individuals, and within communities, they're going to manipulate that to get their way. For example, if most people in the community are wary of vaccination and believe that the vaccination does not work or that side effects will be bad, they will give a negative signal to others who might otherwise be in favour of, neutral towards vaccination. On the other hand, if most people in a community support vaccination, they will give a positive signal to others. So we're to be corralled like sheep, but there is only one thought pattern, that is that the government's vaccination policy is right. This was a key phrase that I found in the document. It's essential to educate the media on the importance of providing context when reporting on anti-vaccine sentiment to make sure that people do not form an erroneous impression that this is the dominant viewpoint. So we must close everything down so that you don't really see what's going on. But I've added this myself. It's the UK government and the World Health Organization to control and manipulate the media so that people don't know the real truth of the benefits, risks and dangers of all vaccines, including COVID-19. So there's no truth because the truth's being suppressed. And that led me to make the statement, well, if you suppress the truth, you can only have erroneous opinion. I think I'm correct in saying that, David, aren't I?
Yeah, it seems rational. If the truth dies, then you have no basis for making any decisions at all.
None at all. So we'll move on to the conclusion here. There's a lot in this document. Encourage people to read it for themselves. Creating an enabling environment, making vaccination easy, quick and affordable. So they're going to do that. Harnessing social influences, especially from people who are particularly trusted by and identified with members of relevant communities. So this is going to be your footballers, pop stars, and likewise, and then increasing motivation through open and transparent dialogue and communication about uncertainty and risks, including around the safety and benefits of vaccination. But you've shown very clearly in that other World Health Organization document, David, that they're going to suppress dialogue as much as they can because it worries them.
Yes, the trusted the trusted enablers and validators of this, we saw how that worked just before the vaccination program started, because the newspapers had festooned the front pages with celebrity endorsements of the vaccine program. All these celebrities were lined up. They're even lining up Her Majesty the Queen to do this. But also people like Parkinson and Michael Parkinson. So what would be viewed as trusted people from the good old days of the BBC before we knew what they were actually doing behind the scenes, when they were trusted, they've rolled these people out of retirement. They're putting them on the front page of the newspaper and saying, look, they're getting vaccinated. They say it's okay. You think the same way. You know, it's okay to think that way because these people do. This is the trick. It's been rolled out. We see it. And here you're showing it being discussed and planned.
Discussed and planned, and to just reinforce it from the BBC's webpage from today. So this was one of the embedded articles, COVID-19 vaccine allergy warning over the new jab. Mike's mentioned this because it ties in with the NHS staff. People with a history of significant allergic reactions should not have the jab. But then it muddies the water by saying it's an anaphylactoid reaction, which is a bit of skin rash, breathiness. So they don't talk about the fact people can drop dead on the end of the needle. So this is manipulation of the news. And we can clearly see that there is only to be a positive side to the vaccines put across. We don't want to get into any of the scientific detail about the dangers.
So what? It's 2 o'clock. What are we going to
do? Do you want to, David? Would you like to just end on your 3 end slides, since we're running out of time very quickly?
Which ones do you want?
So we'll go on to we'll go on to, we don't really have time for that, but we'll go on to the NHS is not my church. And then we'll go on to Nippy, and then we'll go on to the closing slide, which is the cartoon.
Okay. Yes. Well. Okay. This is the NHS isn't my church and salvation. This is Lawrence Fox getting to the core of the culture war. Now he's gone into this. He's gone into this with his eyes open. He's set up a party to start to campaign to reclaim the cultural lost ground, and he has highlighted one important aspect of it here. So he tweeted out, "The NHS isn't my church and salvation. Its employees aren't my saviours. If you can't deal with a 99.9% survival rate virus, you aren't fit for purpose. You don't need protecting. My elderly relatives do. I also love your emergency care, and will continue to pay for it for now." That's a very powerful statement, and I thought it was gallant of him to take that on, because that's part of the cultural landscape that we're told we couldn't challenge. Right? What it was Gordon Brown, I think, that said the only thing that people in Britain believe in is the NHS. Well, there's someone standing up and saying, "Well, I don't believe in this false religion, and it's not my saviour," and actually speaking some truth to power and pushing back against the cultural narrative. This is very encouraging. It takes bravery to do this.
Okay, and that is Nippy exhibiting bravery?
Oh, this is at the end of the news when you do, on a lighter note, we come to Scottish politics. We'll talk a bit more about this next time, but Nippy has put out a COVID guide to etiquette and pandemic politeness, which is truly hilarious, right? In a kind of cringe-worthy way. It's the sort of jokes that if you're watching them in some sort of entertainment venue when we used to have such things, you would be both laughing and feeling so cringy that you'd be picking bits of fluff off the carpet and reading your beer mat because you couldn't quite bear to look. It's that sort of humour. Yes, he's explaining to people, how to not cause offence when you don't shake hands, don't hug a loved one you haven't seen in years, and tell people to get 2 meters away from you in a supermarket. Because all of these things might make you look like a bit of an idiot, and it's how to overcome that social awkwardness of being that idiot. So that's what the Scottish Government's bringing to you this week. Yes, what else can we say? Except it's not over, Mike.
It's not over, David.
It's not over. So this is a cartoon here. It's not over till the fat lady sings. And here we have a government official giving the fat lady a ticking off and saying singing remains a health risk, as does your obesity. Besides, we've destroyed the theatre industry. So it's not over because the fat lady, for a whole host of reasons, cannot sing.
Yes, indeed.
Well, that was the news in UK as we can best report it, since it's becoming so difficult to actually describe some of the prescribed madness which is going on, but we'll leave it there. We'll say thank you very much to everybody that's joined us. We'll also say thank you very much for all the excellent informative emails that are coming in, which show that people are really doing their homework and researching. This is brilliant. And yes, we are happy to take criticism, but we also reserve the right to respond to that criticism when it comes in.
News extra in about 10 minutes. If anybody any of our members want to hang on for that, we'll be back in about 10 minutes on the live stream on the UK Column website.
Yeah, so thank you for joining us, and we'll be back with news on Friday.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.